Bestie, before we go deeper, tap like and comment, I'm ready, because it helps more people find uplifting stories like this. Atlanta heat still clung to the late afternoon air when Sterling Ward slammed his car door hard enough to echo through the quiet residential street. He wasn't supposed to be here. He hadn't called. He hadn't announced himself. He hadn't even fully thought through what he planned to say once he arrived. But none of that mattered. All he could see in his mind was the headline he'd read 3 hours earlier. Community leader Naomi Reddick expands youth center with support from her Plutocrat benefactor, Martin Hale, his ex-wife, standing beside another man. A man the article described with wealth, influence, and a protective presence. A word he had never heard her use with him. That single sentence struck something raw inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Jealousy, regret, a sharp sense of losing something he never should have let go. He tried to shake it off as he marched up the walkway of her new townhouse, but his pulse was hammering. His jaw was tight. His thoughts were a storm rolling into itself. He had spent months pretending he didn't miss her, pretending he didn't think of her voice during long board meetings, pretending he didn't replay their last nights together in the penthouse. But the moment he saw that headline, every wall he had built around himself cracked. He reached her front door and didn't even give himself time to breathe. He knocked hard, the type of knock that didn't belong to a casual drop-in. He didn't plan the force. It came out of him like instinct. Inside, he heard a chair move. Quiet footsteps. Then, a voice he knew too well. Hold on 1 second. His heart kicked against his ribs. The door opened, and there she was. Naomi Reddick, the woman he had once sworn to spend his life with. The woman he divorced without raising his voice, because silence felt easier than truth. She wore a soft gray hoodie, sleeves pushed to her elbows and her hair pulled back into a bun with a pencil tucked through it. No luxury, no makeup, no effort to impress anyone. She looked real, grounded, stronger than the woman he had watched walk away. She blinked at him, not angry, not shocked, just puzzled. Sterling, why are you here? He had imagined 100 versions of this moment on the drive over, but none of them included her looking this calm, this sure of herself, this unaffected by his sudden presence. His voice snagged. I need to talk to you. Before she could respond, he stepped inside. She didn't stop him, but she stood very still, as if letting him into her house didn't mean letting him into her life. The first thing he noticed wasn't furniture or decor. It was the absence of everything he thought would be here. No lavish pieces, no expensive art, no signs of the lifestyle she used to share with him. Instead, stacks of volunteer applications, framed drawings made by local teens, notebooks covered in handwritten plans, a whiteboard with outreach schedules, budgeting folders labeled in her neat handwriting. This wasn't a home built through money. This was a home built through purpose. But Sterling didn't absorb all that just yet, because his eyes were searching for something else, or someone else. He heard a soft clearing of a throat from the living room. Sterling stiffened. There, sitting on her couch, was the man from the article. Older, white-haired, wearing comfortable house slippers, dressed in a casual shirt with reading glasses perched low on his nose. A stack of spreadsheets balanced on his knee. He wasn't leaning toward Naomi. He wasn't invading her space. He wasn't acting like a new husband or a secret lover. But Sterling's mind, already stretched tight, didn't register logic. It only registered the image. Another man in his ex-wife's living room. Comfortable, settled, relaxed. Sterling felt a punch in his chest. Naomi stepped forward, her tone steady. Sterling, this is Martin Hale. Martin looked up slowly, gentle and unfazed, like someone accustomed to handling situations with patience rather than pressure. Afternoon, he said politely. We weren't expecting company, but good to meet you. Sterling didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on Naomi. This is him? He asked, voice low. Naomi frowned. What? The man you're calling your, he swallowed hard, plutocrat. Naomi exhaled the kind of breath people make when they can already sense trouble they didn't ask for. Sterling, it was a joke. A harmless nickname. Martin shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware tension had entered the room. But Sterling wasn't calm enough to notice that the older man posed no threat, that he was wearing bargain slippers, that he looked more like someone's wise uncle than a romantic rival. Sterling's chest tightened. He had stormed here, expecting a threat, but what he felt rising inside him wasn't anger. It was something far worse. Fear. Fear that he had misunderstood everything. Fear that he was too late. Fear that she had found someone better, someone who saw her in all the ways he never learned to. His voice came out strained. "Naomi, are you with him?" The room fell still. Naomi didn't look shocked by the question. She looked disappointed he had walked into her home with assumptions already made. But Sterling wasn't ready for her answer. Not yet. Not with everything he believed slipping through his fingers. Naomi didn't immediately respond to his question. She simply studied him, his tightened jaw, his rigid posture, the way his hands wouldn't stay still. Sterling hadn't looked like this during the divorce hearings, or the day she packed her things, or even when they exchanged final paperwork. But standing in her living room now, he looked shaken. Truly shaken. Before she answered, she glanced toward Martin, giving him a small, reassuring nod that eased the awkward tension in the room. Martin, wise enough to know when personal matters didn't need an extra audience, removed his glasses. "I'll step outside and let the two of you talk," he said. "No, Martin," Naomi started, but he raised a gentle hand. "It's fine. I'll take a call outside. Holler if you need me." He gathered his papers, slid into those soft slippers, and walked to the porch with the calm pace of a man who had seen life from angles Sterling couldn't begin to imagine. Once the door closed behind him, silence filled the room again. Not heavy, not harsh, just loaded. Naomi crossed her arms lightly, not defensively, but with the posture of someone setting the tone. "Sterling," she said, her voice steady, "why would you think I'm with him?" He swallowed. "Hard, because you called him your Plutocrat." She blinked once, then twice. "You came all the way across Atlanta because of a nickname." "It wasn't just a nickname," he argued. "The article said, he funds your programs. There were pictures of you two together. Community blogs called him your partner. What was I supposed to think? That I moved on with a man old enough to be my grandfather?" She shot back. He had no answer for that. Naomi shook her head slowly, but there was no anger in her expression, just disbelief. "Sterling, he's a retired strategist. He's married, happily. His wife heads a nonprofit in Savannah. He helps me because he believes in what I'm doing." Sterling took a step closer, not even aware he had moved until she looked down at his shoes. "You didn't have to storm in here like this," Naomi continued, calmer now. "If you wanted clarity, you could have asked." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I didn't come here to be rational," he admitted. "Not today." Her eyebrows lifted. Clearly, he ran a hand down his face, trying to organize the emotions he had kept buried for months. But everything spilled at once, the long nights staring at the skyline alone, the shallow dates that left him emptier, the regrets he never processed. "I saw those pictures," he said quietly. "I saw you smiling. I saw him standing beside you. I read that quote about him keeping things running for you. It hit me harder than I expected." Naomi's lips pressed together, not unkindly. "Why?" He hesitated. For the first time since stepping into her home, Sterling looked vulnerable. Not powerful, not sharp, not the confident man who always knew the next move. "Because it looked like someone else was giving you what I couldn't," he said. "Support, attention, partnership." She inhaled slowly, taking in the honesty he rarely displayed. "Sterling," she said, voice gentler now. "Support isn't a competition, and it doesn't erase the years we had. But Martin isn't a replacement for you. He never could be. That should have soothed him. Instead, it unsettled him more, because if Martin wasn't the replacement, then something else was missing. Something he couldn't name yet." He let his eyes travel around her living room again. The care, the structure, the intentionality. Everything in her space felt earned, not gifted. He could see her fingerprints on all of it. "You built all this on your own?" he said softly. "Yes," she replied simply. He stepped closer, not aggressively, but almost subconsciously drawn to her certainty. "Why didn't you tell me you were starting this project? That you needed help?" Naomi lifted her head. "Because I didn't want your money," she said plainly. "I wanted someone who cared about the work itself, not the image, not the credit, not the impression it made in corporate circles." He felt that hit deep, like a truth he had avoided acknowledging. "And the reason I didn't come to you," she continued, "is because I knew you were in a different world. One I didn't fit in anymore." He took in the words with a slow nod. It made sense. It hurt, but it made sense. Naomi looked at him closely. I've grown, Sterling. I've changed. My priorities shifted, and I needed space to become this version of myself. He exhaled. You look happy. She didn't brag. She didn't glow with pride. She just nodded, a soft honesty he wasn't prepared for. I am, she said. That hurt too, but in a way that made him aware of the life he had taken for granted. A muffled sound drifted from outside, Martin's voice as he spoke on his phone, giving them privacy without being far. Naomi glanced toward the door, then back at Sterling. I know why you came here, she murmured. He looked up sharply. Do you? Yes, she said. You were scared. There it was, a truth no one in his corporate world ever dared to say out loud. Sterling stared at her, unable to deny it. I'm not with him, she repeated firmly. But I also can't pretend your arrival didn't tell me something. What's that? He asked, bracing himself. That you still feel something, even if you're not ready to name it. He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Not when everything inside him was a mix of longing, regret, confusion, and an ache he had ignored far too long. Naomi took a step back, putting a natural boundary between them. We can talk, she said, but not with assumptions, and not with this level of heat. If you want answers, you need to start with respect. Sterling nodded, slow but sincere. He was humbled, off balance, thrown into awareness he hadn't expected. He had come here searching for a threat, but the only thing he confronted was himself. Sterling didn't sit. He didn't relax. He didn't even take off his jacket, though the warmth inside Naomi's home made the fabric cling to his shoulders. He just stood there, caught between pride and the reality that pride was exactly what had destroyed everything before. Naomi walked toward her dining table, gathering a few folders and stacking them neatly, giving him space to find his footing. She didn't rush him. She didn't demand anything. Her calmness made the air shift, inviting honesty without forcing it. Sterling, she said quietly, why did you really react the way you did? The truth. His jaw tensed. You already know. I want to hear it from you. He looked around the room again, taking in the details he'd overlooked earlier. Nothing about her space screamed wealth. Instead, it carried intention. Colorful artwork created by teenagers from the youth center decorated the walls. A jar full of pencils sat next to a stack of worksheets. A bulletin board pinned with volunteer shifts leaned beside a small bookshelf filled with parenting guides, community planning manuals, and faith-based devotionals. It struck him hard. This wasn't the home of a woman relying on a powerful man. This was the home of a woman relying on herself. I wasn't prepared for any of this, he admitted. For what? That I moved on? Or that I grew? Her voice wasn't sharp, just direct. He swallowed. Both. Naomi nodded slowly. Growth doesn't wait for permission. He lowered his gaze, the truth landing heavier than he expected. What made this moment hit even harder was how familiar it felt. He'd seen this version of Naomi before, the woman who asked straightforward questions without sugarcoating. The woman who pushed him to think deeper when he relied too much on charm. The woman who loved him with clarity, not confusion. But he hadn't listened then. Seeing you with someone else. He started, trying to steady his words, made me realize something I didn't want to admit. What's that? That I've been avoiding how the divorce affected me. He said it plainly, with no mask. Naomi paused mid-step, surprised, not dramatically, but in a way that softened her posture. Sterling, I didn't think you felt anything. You seemed fine, business as usual. That's the worst part, he confessed. I convinced myself I was fine. I buried everything under travel and meetings and deals. But the truth is, he exhaled, I never stopped thinking about what went wrong. Naomi leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossing lightly. And what do you think went wrong? He didn't hesitate this time. I stopped showing up. The room went still. Not tense, just honest. He met her eyes directly. You were right when you said our worlds drifted apart. I stayed so focused on climbing higher that I didn't notice how far away I'd moved from you. Naomi breathed out through her nose, not in anger but in understanding. Marriage isn't built on moments, she said softly. It's built on presence, and you weren't present. Not with me. He nodded, voice thick. I know, and the more I tried to tell you, the more invisible I felt. His chest tightened. He remembered faintly, Late-night whispers from her side of the bed, quiet requests. For help with community projects, gentle nudges asking him to come to events. Things he always brushed off with, "I'm tired," or "next time," or "I've got work." He hated himself for how normal those excuses had felt at the time. "Naomi," he said slowly, "I thought providing was enough. I thought giving you comfort was the same as giving you me." She looked at him with a compassion that carried depth, not softness. Comfort without partnership becomes isolation. He closed his eyes briefly, letting that settle. When he opened them again, she was looking around the room, motioning at everything she'd built since leaving their penthouse. "Sterling, this life isn't luxurious. It's busy, it's demanding, it's real. But it gives me purpose. And I needed that more than I needed fancy elevators or marble floors." He followed her gaze over the room. The mismatched throw pillows, the thrift store couch, the volunteer sign-in sheets, the half-finished lunch sitting next to a laptop coated in sticky notes. Her world had changed. But it made sense. It was authentic. And she seemed lighter, like she wasn't carrying the weight of expectation anymore. Sterling rubbed the back of his neck, voice quiet. "I didn't recognize how unhappy you were back then. I didn't know how to tell you without sounding ungrateful," she said. "And when I finally found the words, you were too far into your world to hear them." He nodded again, this time with acceptance, not defense. "Seeing you're home now," he said, taking a slow breath. "I understand you better than I ever did when we were together." Her eyebrows lifted. "Do you?" "Yes." He stepped closer, not invading her space, but acknowledging hers. "You weren't looking for a man to rescue you. You were looking for a partner to walk with you." She looked at him, eyes steady, unguarded. "Well," she said, "life teaches all of us eventually." He managed a small, almost self-deprecating smile. "I learned late." "Late isn't the same as never," she answered. They held each other's gaze for a few long seconds, silent, reflective, complicated. Then Naomi stepped back and motioned toward the living room. "What you saw today wasn't romance, Sterling. It was mentorship, commitment to my work, nothing more. I just want you to understand that—" "I do," he said. "Now I do." But beneath the calm, something new stirred in him. Not jealousy, not entitlement, recognition, awareness, the realization that he had never truly seen the depth of her world until this very moment. Naomi watched him carefully, as if trying to decide whether this version of him was temporary or genuine. For the first time in months, Sterling wanted to prove something, but not through wealth or status or success. He wanted to prove he could listen. Sterling shifted his weight, feeling the truth settle into his chest with a heaviness he hadn't known how to carry before. Naomi stood quietly, giving him room to process, but not cushioning him from the impact. She never believed in softening lessons life was teaching someone. That had always been one of the things he admired about her. Her honesty carried dignity, not hurt. He looked toward the doorway where Martin had exited moments earlier. The sound of his faint phone conversation drifted inside through the slightly cracked window. "Naomi," Sterling said slowly, "I need you to know." She waited. "When I saw the articles, when I saw the pictures of you with him, it didn't hit me because I thought you were with an older man. It hit me because it showed me how fully you were living your life without me." Her eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. "It showed me," he continued, "that you were building things I never slowed down to understand. It showed me you weren't waiting on me to come back, that you created a world where you didn't need my money or my last name." He looked down briefly, remembering the polished floors and silent penthouse he returned to night after night. "Meanwhile, I kept telling myself I was fine, but I wasn't. I was just comfortable." Naomi's brow tightened gently. "Comfort can be a trap, Sterling. It tricks you into believing everything is okay." He nodded. "I know that now." She stepped toward the couch, rearranging some youth art supplies on the coffee table. Her movements were calm, practiced, like she had done this 1,000 times. It reminded him she had created a routine here, a rhythm, a life that no longer circled around him. "You never asked me to stay in the penthouse," she said. "You never asked me how I felt living in a place that didn't reflect who I was. I thought providing comfort meant providing care," he said. Naomi shook her head. "Comfort and care are not the same. Comfort keeps people still. Care moves with them." Her words struck deeper than anything he'd heard in months. He lifted his gaze to hers again. "When we were together, I didn't realize how much I expected you to adapt to my world. I never thought about stepping into yours. That was the problem," she said plainly. My world didn't fit the image you had for your life, and I slowly learned to stop trying to force belonging. He sat down, finally, on the edge of the chair across from her, elbows resting on his knees. The weight of his reflections dropped onto his shoulders like an overdue burden. You carried everything alone, he admitted. And I didn't see it. Naomi shifted her posture, her tone calm but filled with certainty. I didn't need you to fix every problem. I needed you to acknowledge that my problems mattered. Sterling blinked. He felt that sentence more than he expected. She continued, I needed you to celebrate my wins the way I celebrated yours. I needed you to show up for the things that shaped my identity. But I was the only one trying, and I took that for granted, he whispered. The admission lingered between them, unexpected, unforced, honest. Naomi finally sat down across from him, folding her hands on her lap. Sterling, I'm not saying you were a bad husband. I'm saying you were a good one, for the life you wanted, not for the life I needed. He felt that deeply, and surprisingly, he didn't push back. Another quiet moment passed. It wasn't awkward. It was necessary. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people stop pretending they're okay and begin acknowledging their flaws. Naomi glanced around her home again, as if pointing silently to the proof of her journey. This is who I am. Someone who loves the community I came from. Someone who puts purpose before comfort. Someone who needs partnership, not pretense. Sterling nodded. I see that now. Her expression shifted, a little softer. Do you? Yes, he said, voice low but steady. I see it in a way I couldn't when we were married. Back then I was too focused on keeping my world perfect. Now I'm seeing yours. The honesty in his tone made her eyes stay on him a little longer. And seeing your world, he added, made me understand why you walked away. Naomi's eyes glimmered, not with tears, but with clarity. I didn't walk away from you. I walked toward myself. There's a difference. He leaned back, letting those words settle. They were painful, but fair. She stood again, picking up a youth brochure from her table. Every folder here represents a kid we help. Every name is a story waiting for a chance. I needed a life that connected me with meaning, not status. That's why I'm here. And that's what I never understood, Sterling replied. You didn't see it, she said gently. And I stopped trying to explain it. He didn't defend himself. He couldn't, not to a truth that clear. From the porch, Martin's quiet laughter floated in for a moment, a reminder that the world continued moving around them. Naomi looked back at Sterling with a steady, thoughtful expression. The reason you're reacting now is because seeing someone else support me forced you to confront something you avoided. He raised his eyes. Which is that you still have feelings, she said softly. Not because of jealousy, but because you didn't expect me to rise in ways that didn't include you. He felt a tug in his chest. Not guilt, not shame, but recognition. She continued, This isn't about another man. This is about you realizing that losing me meant losing access to a part of yourself you never explored. Sterling's breath caught for a moment. She was right, and she wasn't weaponizing it. She was diagnosing it. A knock on the doorframe made them both turn gently. Martin stood there, polite as ever. Naomi, I'm going to run to the car for a moment, he said. Take your time. Thank you, she replied. As he stepped away, Naomi turned back to Sterling. So, she said quietly, now that you see all this, what do you want to do with that truth? He looked at her, the answer already forming even if he wasn't ready to say it out loud. He wanted to understand her. He wanted to repair what broke. He wanted to face the version of himself he had avoided for years. But for the first time in their entire relationship, Sterling chose not to rush into an answer. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I'm ready to stop pretending. Naomi nodded once, slow, steady, accepting. Good, she said. That's the first real step you've taken in a long time. Sterling wasn't sure what he expected next. An argument, a lecture, maybe even a door slammed in his face. But Naomi didn't react with the intensity he'd braced for. Instead, she walked toward the kitchen counter and poured 2 glasses of water, setting one in front of him without comment. A gesture so ordinary, but something about its simplicity made his throat tighten. You're sweating, she said lightly. Sit down. He obeyed without a fight. It had been years since Naomi told him what to do in this gentle but commanding tone. It reminded him of late nights in their old apartment before success complicated everything. when she would hand him tea and tell him to stop overthinking a business pitch. Now he sat across from her, feeling like the world had tilted into an unfamiliar shape. Nothing looked threatening, yet his chest carried a weight he didn't know how to release. Naomi folded her arms, leaning back in her chair. "Before we go further, I think you should talk to Martin." Sterling stiffened. "Why?" "Because you walked in with assumptions about him. He deserves the respect of clearing them up. I didn't accuse him." "Your tone did," she replied plainly. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Before he could respond, the front door opened again, and Martin stepped inside, wiping his glasses on the hem of his shirt. He looked peaceful, like nothing in this house could surprise him. The quiet confidence of a man who had lived enough life to stop taking things personally. "Everything all right in here?" Martin asked. Naomi nodded. "Yes. But I think the two of you need a moment." Martin chuckled softly. "Do we now?" "Yes," she said, giving him a look that Sterling recognized instantly. It was the same look Naomi used to give teenagers in her program when she wanted them to take accountability without raising her voice. Martin walked in further, placing his papers gently on the coffee table. "Well, Sterling, seems like we have a little misunderstanding to clear up." Sterling straightened, clearing his throat. "I may have reacted too strongly earlier." "May have" is doing a lot of work in that sentence, Martin teased gently, sitting down. "But I've been married 40 years. I've seen men react worse for less." Naomi hid a small smile behind her hand. Martin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let's start with the basics. I'm not Naomi's partner. I'm not trying to be. I help her because the work she's doing matters." Sterling nodded, trying to hide the embarrassment rising up his neck. "And that nickname she joked about?" Martin added, waving a hand. "It's just that, a joke. I've been called worse by my grandkids." Naomi added, "He laughs every time I say it. Trust me." Martin continued, "My wife adores Naomi's work. If you don't believe anything else, believe that. She's the reason I even got involved." Sterling felt his shoulders drop a little. The tension began to dissolve, replaced by something he wasn't used to, humility. "I shouldn't have assumed," he said quietly. "I saw the photos, the headlines, and I reacted." Martin raised an eyebrow. "You reacted because you care, maybe more than you're willing to admit." Naomi's eyes flicked toward Sterling, measuring his reaction carefully. Sterling didn't deny it. He couldn't. Not now. Martin picked up the spreadsheet he'd been reviewing before Sterling barged in. "These numbers we're checking? They're about keeping this youth center running. Nothing romantic about grant proposals, I promise you." He held the papers up with a grin. "Look at this. I've spent my entire afternoon helping her figure out where to cut costs without hurting the programs. My wife sends me here with snacks so I don't get cranky halfway through." Naomi laughed softly. "She sends me snacks too." "Exactly," Martin said. "This is a family effort, but not the kind you think." Sterling swallowed, realizing how wrong his assumptions had been, and how deeply they had come from an emotional place he hadn't acknowledged. Martin softened his tone. "Sterling, you walked in here looking for a competitor. But I'm not that. I'm just a man helping someone build something meaningful." Naomi nodded beside him. A man who's been in this work long enough to know that support isn't about ownership. Sterling looked between them, Naomi with her steady patience, Martin with his fatherly warmth, and felt the shift happen inside him. Something clicked. Something opened. "I'm sorry for coming in the way I did," he said honestly. "I was out of line." Martin smiled. Apology accepted. No hard feelings. "I've lived long enough to understand when a man's actions come from fear rather than disrespect." Sterling bristled slightly. "Fear? Oh, absolutely," Martin said with a knowing smirk. "You feared losing something you didn't realize you still treasured." The words landed like a soft punch to the chest, gentle but undeniable. Naomi looked away, her expression unreadable. Sterling cleared his throat. "I care about her. That much I won't deny." Martin nodded, placing his hand on the back of his chair. "Then don't let that care turn into panic. Panic leads to wrong conclusions and rushed decisions. Care leads to growth." Naomi's eyes met Sterling's again. Her gaze wasn't angry or dismissive. It was observant, waiting to see what he would do with the truth placed in front of him. Martin stood. "Now that we've cleared the air, I'll head back to the office. Naomi, text me those budget updates when you finish." "I will," she said. Sterling rose as well. "Thank you," he murmured. "No need to thank me. Martin replied with a wink. Just don't storm into her house like that again. You'll give an old man a heart attack. Naomi smiled, and Sterling even managed a quiet laugh. Martin grabbed his papers, slipped on his worn slippers, and walked toward the door. As he stepped outside, he turned back once more. And Sterling? Yes. Whatever you're feeling, deal with it honestly. She deserves that. And so do you. The door closed behind him, leaving Sterling and Naomi alone again, but with the tension transformed into something deeper, more urgent, and impossible to ignore. The quiet left behind after Martin stepped out wasn't the same quiet from earlier. Before, it had been tense, thick with assumptions, jealousy, and Sterling's internal chaos. Now, it felt like the air had shifted, allowing the truth to settle without interruption. Naomi sat down again, crossing one leg over the other, her face thoughtful. Sterling stayed standing for a moment, hands in his pockets trying to piece together the storm inside him. You good? Naomi asked, voice softer now. I'm not sure, he admitted. Honesty looks good on you, she said with a faint smile. He huffed out a breath. Feels strange. She laughed lightly. That's because you're used to speaking in boardroom language. This is different. Sterling looked around her living room again, this time not scanning for signs of another man, but absorbing the reality that this space reflected the woman she had become. He moved slowly toward the bookshelf, fingertips brushing lightly against the textured spines of community planning guides and youth leadership workbooks. You built a life here that has nothing to do with me, he said. That was the point, Naomi replied. I needed to know who I was without the structure your world forced around me. He nodded absently, still studying the room. I didn't realize how much space I took up. Naomi didn't rush to correct him. She let the truth sit there a moment. You didn't take up space on purpose, she finally said. But your lifestyle, your schedule, your expectations, they left very little room for me to grow. He turned to her. I never meant to do that. I know, she said. Intent matters. But so does impact. That line hit him harder than she could know. He walked back to the table and sat down across from her, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. Naomi, when I walked in earlier and saw him sitting there with spreadsheets, I felt something I haven't felt since we split. What did you feel? He paused, choosing his words carefully, trying, for once, not to hide behind ego. Like I lost my place in your life, he said quietly. For months I told myself I was fine, but seeing you with someone who supports what you're doing, it made me realize I haven't been fine at all. Naomi's expression softened, not with pity, but with understanding. You didn't lose your place, she said. You let it go. He swallowed. I know. And I had to let you walk away, she continued. Because if I had chased you, I would have kept shrinking myself to fit into your life. That image, Naomi shrinking, sent a jolt through him. The woman sitting in front of him now wasn't small. She was grounded, confident, clear. And he wasn't sure he had ever known this version of her. Do you regret the divorce? He asked suddenly. Naomi didn't hesitate. No, I regret the pain, not the decision. Ouch. A clean cut. But, she added gently, the divorce forced both of us to grow up in ways we probably wouldn't have otherwise. Sterling looked down at his hands, rubbing the ridge of his thumb. When I saw the headline calling him your plutocrat, he said, I thought, maybe you found someone who could give you everything I didn't. I never asked you for everything, she corrected. I asked you for presence. He lifted his gaze, meeting her eyes. I hear you now. She nodded slowly. Good, because hearing each other was our biggest struggle. There was a pause, a long one, not uncomfortable, just full. Sterling shifted in his seat again. Naomi, do you really think he had no idea how I felt when I came in? She smirked. Martin notices everything. He just isn't the type to escalate tension. He was calm, Sterling murmured. That's experience, she replied. He's worked with people from all walks of life. He knows when someone is reacting from fear, not pride. Sterling's shoulders slumped slightly. He said that because he recognized it. Sterling sat back, running a hand along his jaw. Fear of what? Naomi answered without pausing. Fear of losing me twice. His breath caught. Naomi didn't flinch or look away. Her eyes stayed steady on his. That's what this was, she said. You weren't scared of Martin. You were scared of being replaced. He felt heat rise behind his eyes. Not tears, not yet, but something close. And here's the truth, Sterling, she continued. No one replaced you. But you stepped away long before I did. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the truth land. Naomi leaned back, folding her arms lightly. Tell me something. Why did seeing someone support my dream make you feel threatened? He opened his eyes slowly. Because I never supported it the way I should have. And seeing someone else do it made me realize how much I failed you. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. He exhaled shakily. You're building something meaningful, Naomi. And for the first time since our divorce, I see that clearly. Naomi tapped her fingers lightly on the table. Awareness is a start. But it's only a start. I know. The front door creaked again, and Sterling instinctively glanced toward it, expecting Martin. But instead, it was just a gust of air from the neighborhood breeze. Naomi stood, stretching her arms lightly. So now that we've had this conversation, what do you want, Sterling? He rose too, standing across from her with the coffee table between them. It felt symbolic, this distance, this boundary, this acknowledgement of the space she had built. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Thought. Tried again. I don't want to lose whatever chance I have left, he said honestly. Not as your ex. As someone who still cares. Her eyes softened with something complex. Recognition, maybe. Memory. Maybe even a small piece of hope she wasn't ready to admit yet. We're not there yet, she said gently. I know, he replied. But, she added, picking up a stack of folders, we can talk, we can rebuild understanding. Slowly, carefully, he nodded, letting the weight of that promise settle. This wasn't reconciliation. Not yet, but it was the first step toward something that felt real. Naomi moved toward the kitchen again, busying herself with something she didn't truly need to do. Sterling stayed still, absorbing the moment, the truth, the shift. Peak moment. #2 had already happened the moment he saw Martin's slippers and spreadsheets. But the real shock, the deeper realization happened right now. Naomi hadn't replaced him. She had replaced the version of herself who accepted less than she deserved. And if Sterling wanted any future with her, any chance at all, he would have to rise to meet the woman she had become. Sterling stood in the middle of Naomi's living room long after Martin left, long after the tension crackled into silence, long after Naomi returned to sorting her volunteer paperwork with the steady focus of someone who no longer entertained chaos. He didn't speak. She didn't rush him. The space between them felt different now, not hostile, not warm, but charged with truths they had finally said aloud. Truths that uncovered wounds neither of them had addressed during the divorce. Naomi paused her sorting and looked up. You're thinking hard, he exhaled slowly. I'm trying to understand how everything got this far. She tilted her head. You mean how we got divorced? Or how you ended up storming into my house today like somebody owed you answers? That stung, but not unfairly. Both, he said. Naomi placed her pen down, her eyes narrowing in thought. Sterling, you act like this happened overnight. It didn't. It happened in small moments, little breaks, quiet disappointments, unsaid frustrations. His chest tightened. I thought we were okay back then. I did too, she admitted. But every time I tried to tell you something didn't feel right, you brushed it off. You were busy, or tired, or dealing with a big client. And I kept adjusting and adjusting and adjusting until I adjusted myself out of the marriage. Her tone wasn't bitter. It was factual. Why didn't you tell me it was that serious? He asked quietly. I did, she replied. You just didn't hear me. Sterling closed his eyes briefly, the regret curling through him like a realization he was late to understand. And when we separated, Naomi continued, you didn't fight. You didn't ask for counseling. You didn't ask what I needed. You just let me walk. I thought giving you the space you asked for was respectful, he said. She sighed gently. Space isn't the same as distance, and distance isn't the same as letting go. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. Naomi, were you waiting for me to fight for us? Her lips pressed together subtly. I was waiting for you to show that you still cared. He sank into the chair behind him, feeling the truth press against his ribs. Naomi slid a folder into a stack and tapped it twice, a nervous habit he hadn't seen in years. Sterling, can I ask you something? Of course, he said, bracing himself. When we divorced, did you ever stop to ask why I was unhappy? Really ask? Silence. He shook his head slowly. I didn't know how. I thought I was doing everything right, providing, working hard, being successful. Naomi nodded softly, not smugly, but with the calm of someone who had processed her pain long before this moment. You were successful for the world. But inside our home, you were distant. He swallowed hard. And you were lonely. Very, she said quietly. But I got used to being alone long before the divorce. Her voice was almost too calm, too resigned. Sterling leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Did you think I didn't love you? She considered her answer carefully. I thought you didn't know how to love me the way I needed. That punch landed deep, and I didn't know how to ask without sounding like I wanted more than you had to give. He stared at her, the realization slicing through him. She wasn't asking for luxury or extravagance. She was asking for presence. And now? He asked. What do you need now? Naomi looked at him closely, long enough for him to feel both exposed and seen. I need a partner who shows up, she said. Not just when things are easy, not when it's convenient, not after a headline scares him into action, but consistently, with intention. He nodded slowly. I can do that. She held up a hand. I'm not asking you to promise anything. Promises without action are empty. His shoulders dropped. She was right. Words had been too easy for him. Action had been too difficult. Sterling, she continued, before you can talk about showing up for me, you need to ask yourself whether you're ready to show up for yourself, because that's where you always fall short. He froze. What do you mean? You spent our marriage filling every silent moment with work, travel, and obligations, she said. You never gave yourself stillness. You never sat with your own feelings long enough to understand them. He blinked, caught off guard. I didn't think I needed to. That's exactly why everything fell apart. Sterling felt something shift inside him, something he'd never felt sitting in a boardroom or during a high-stakes negotiation. A quiet sort of clarity, a dawning awareness he'd spent years outrunning. You don't have to answer out loud, Naomi said. But ask yourself something honestly. His breathing slowed. What were you afraid of feeling if you slowed down long enough to sit with it? The question hit like a blow to the chest. And she wasn't attacking him. She was inviting him into truth. He couldn't answer. Not yet. Not with every buried regret bubbling to the surface. The nights he ignored her calls. The events he missed. The promises he made and forgot. The mornings he left before she woke up. The afternoons she tried to talk and he dismissed her with a distracted nod. All the things he told himself were harmless. All the things that had quietly dismantled their marriage. Sterling opened his mouth, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to answer that. You don't have to. Not today, she replied gently. But the answers are there. You just have to stop running long enough to hear them. He looked down at his hands again. She was right. This wasn't about Martin. This wasn't about jealousy. This wasn't even about the divorce. This was about the truth he had avoided facing. He had been scared of slowing down, scared of vulnerability, scared of looking weak, scared of admitting he had needs and fears he didn't know how to talk about, scared that if he stopped achieving, people would stop valuing him, including her. And now Naomi was standing in front of him, quietly asking the question that would shape the rest of the story. Sterling, do you want to keep running? Or do you want to learn who you really are? The hook tightened, the tension deepened, and the mystery began unfolding. What would Sterling choose? Why had he really stormed into her home? And what would he do with these truths now that he could no longer hide from them? Sterling didn't answer Naomi's question right away. He stayed seated, his hands clasped, his posture slightly slumped, as if the weight of years suddenly sat on his shoulders. The silence didn't bother Naomi. She'd learned long ago that silence revealed truths louder than rushed responses. She walked over to the window, pulling the curtain slightly aside to check on the neighborhood teens who usually gathered outside on Fridays. They were tossing a basketball back and forth on the sidewalk, laughing, with the kind of carefree joy she tried to protect through her work. Sterling watched her from where he sat. She didn't look like the woman who used to sit across from him at charity galas or luxury brunches. She looked grounded, steady, connected to something bigger than personal comfort. Naomi, he finally said. She turned. Yes? When did you stop believing I could change? She took her time before answering. It wasn't a single moment. It was a pattern. Every time I tried to talk to you, you brushed it aside. Every time I expressed a need, you interpreted it as criticism. Over time, I stopped seeing effort. I started seeing excuses. Sterling's brows tightened. He wasn't defensive, just confronted. And after the divorce? He asked quietly. After the divorce, she said, walking back toward the table, I realized I had spent so long trying to be heard that when silence finally arrived, it felt peaceful. That hit him harder than anything she'd said so far. Peace. She found peace without him. Naomi sat across from him, folding her hands on the table. You want to understand the truth, Sterling? Here it is. He looked up, bracing himself. The night before we signed the divorce papers, I waited for you to show up and tell me we could fix it. Sterling's mouth parted slightly. Naomi, but you didn't, she continued. You walked into that courthouse like we were finalizing a business transaction. No hesitation, no emotion, just signatures. He swallowed hard. I thought being calm was the strong thing to do. It wasn't calm, Naomi said gently. It was disconnected. He lowered his gaze, the shame raw and unfamiliar. I didn't know what you needed from me back then. Presence, she said again. I needed presence more than anything. Sterling nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Why didn't you tell me you were opening the youth center? I would have supported it. I could have backed it financially. That's exactly why I didn't tell you, she cut in softly. Because I didn't want financial support. I wanted investment, of time, of interest, of care. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head at the realization. You wanted me to believe in you, not sponsor you. Exactly. Her answer was simple, direct, unavoidable. He looked around the room again, taking in the small details with a new lens, the hand-painted sign reading, Hope Room, the worn notebooks used to track mentor sessions, the flyers for upcoming drives. All of it spoke to a level of devotion he had never understood while they were married. You built all of this, he said quietly. With help, she replied. But the vision came from me. And now someone else believes in that vision. Naomi didn't flinch. Yes, Martin believes in it, because he sees the purpose, not the politics. Sterling nodded again, slower this time. I get it. Now, I do. She watched him carefully. Do you? Yes, he said. You needed someone who stood with you, not someone who stood above everything. She gave a small nod, acknowledging his clarity. He leaned forward again, elbows resting on his knees. So now that I understand all this, what do you want from me, if anything? Naomi paused. It wasn't hesitation. She was choosing her words deliberately. I don't want anything from you, Sterling, she said quietly. Not right now. This isn't about me asking. It's about you asking yourself who you are without your achievements. He blinked. What does that mean? You're a great businessman, she said. Everyone knows your name, your company, your reputation. But outside of all that, who are you? What do you stand for when there's no title attached? What do you value when you're not managing a deal? Sterling stared at her, the question sinking deeper than she could see. What do you want from life that isn't tied to success? She asked. What brings you joy outside of work? When was the last time you did something meaningful without worrying about its profitability? He didn't answer, because he couldn't. Naomi leaned back in her chair. Sterling, these are questions you should have asked yourself long before you stormed into my house, and you'll have to ask them again and again if you want to grow. The honesty wasn't harsh, it was a roadmap. He breathed slowly, letting the questions unfold inside his mind. Who am I without my business? What do I want when success isn't the goal? Why did I panic when I thought she moved on? Why did I never ask these questions before? And the biggest one, why did I show up today? Naomi saw the shift in his eyes and spoke softly. You're not here because of Martin. You're here because something in you is unsettled, something old, something you ignored for years. He nodded faintly. And until you face that, she said, nothing between us can move forward. Not friendship, not healing, not anything. He exhaled. So what am I supposed to do? Naomi didn't sugarcoat the truth. You need to figure out what you're running from, she said. Because it's not me. It never was. Sterling froze. Her words hit with a different kind of weight, deep, personal, unavoidable. You want answers from me, she said, but the real answers are inside you. He stared at her, the room quiet except for the sound of kids laughing outside. You're asking me to reflect, he said weakly. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself, she corrected. Start there. He looked toward the door, then the window, then back at her, as if searching for an escape from thoughts he'd never confronted. Naomi stood, her expression composed. You wanted clarity, she said. Now you have the beginning of it. He watched her walk toward the kitchen to check her planner, and for the first time since entering her home, he didn't feel angry, or jealous, or embarrassed. He felt exposed, and strangely, relieved, because the truth Naomi offered wasn't a rejection. It was an invitation to change, to reflect, to understand, to grow. And for the first time, Sterling asked himself the question that would drive the rest of the story. What am I really afraid of facing? Sterling didn't move as Naomi stepped into the kitchen, flipping open her planner and jotting down reminders with practiced ease. The simple act, so mundane, so routine, felt like a mirror reflecting his own lack of routine outside work. She had built a structured life rooted in purpose. He had built one rooted in performance. He finally rose from the chair, walking slowly toward the window. Outside, a group of teens still played basketball, their laughter carrying through the air without a care in the world. One kid missed a shot and fell dramatically onto the sidewalk. The others teased him lovingly before helping him back up. Naomi didn't have kids of her own, not yet. But seeing her so deeply involved in the lives of young people made Sterling see something he'd never fully understood. She had always been building community. He had always been building legacy. Two different missions that were supposed to run side by side, but never did. He turned back toward her. Naomi, did you ever think we'd find our way back to understanding one another? She looked up from her planner but didn't move. I didn't expect it, she said. But I also didn't close the door. I closed the chapter, not the door. His chest tightened. What's the difference? A chapter ends, she said gently. A door can open again. Sterling stepped closer, stopping at the edge of the dining table. And do you want the door to open? She held his gaze. Calm, controlled, honest. I want clarity, for both of us. That's the only way the door opens to anything. He nodded slowly. And what happens if I figure myself out and realize I do want something with you? She didn't flinch. Then we'll talk when you get there. But not before. He absorbed that. It wasn't rejection, it was boundaries, lifelines, expectations. Naomi glanced toward the living room again. This life I built, it took a lot out of me, but it gave me back more than I lost. I'm not willing to risk that for anything unclear or incomplete. He didn't falter for it. I get that, he said quietly. Do you? She asked. I do now. She closed her planner and set it aside. Then let me ask you the real question, Sterling. He stood straighter, ready but unsure. What brought you here? She asked. Not the article, not the photos, not the headline. What emotion pushed you into your car and drove you across town without thinking? Sterling opened his mouth, but the answer didn't come. Not yet. Naomi stepped closer, only a few feet separating them. You came here because you felt something, something you haven't named, something that scared you. He swallowed. I think it scared me because it reminded me of the part of myself I lost when we ended. She nodded slowly. And that part was, he exhaled, the part of me that felt connected. Not to success, not to the world, to someone who saw me before everything else. Naomi didn't smile or soften. She just listened with a seriousness that told him she valued authenticity more than apology. And seeing you today, he continued, looking strong, happy, purposeful, I realized how empty my life feels. Naomi raised a brow. Empty because I'm not in it, or empty because you never built anything meaningful outside of success? The question hit him deeper than he expected. He pressed his lips together, realizing she wasn't asking to wound him. She was asking to help him uncover a truth he'd been avoiding for years. Both, he whispered. They stood still for a moment, each lost in the weight of old memories and new revelations. Naomi finally spoke again. Sterling, every relationship falls apart for a reason. Ours didn't break because of lack of love. It broke because of lack of awareness. And until you understand why you were blind to the things I needed, you can't build anything new, with me or anyone else. He knew she was right. She walked around the table and stood only a few steps from him. You rushed here because you felt threatened, but real growth doesn't come from reacting. It comes from reflecting. He nodded, absorbing her words like medicine. And that brings us here. she said softly. To the question you've been running from. Sterling braced himself. Naomi took a slow breath. Why did losing me hurt more today than it did the day we divorced? The truth hit him like a physical force, because on the day of their divorce, he didn't understand what he was losing. Today he did. He opened his mouth to answer, but Naomi held up a hand. You don't need to answer now. Just sit with the question. Let it challenge you. Let it open the door inside yourself that you've kept locked. He exhaled shakily. Naomi stepped away and picked up her planner again. We're done for today, Sterling. You've taken the first step. The next step is yours alone. He nodded, accepting the boundary and the invitation. As he walked toward the door, he paused and turned back to her. Thank you for being honest. She nodded. Honesty is the only way healing starts. He lingered one moment longer, memorizing the sight of her in her element, her planner, her workspace, her purpose, to remind himself why this mattered. Then he stepped out onto the porch. The evening air hit him like a reset. The kids' laughter, the sound of dribbling, the hum of neighbors chatting, none of it matched the world he had come from. But it grounded him in a way his penthouse never had. Behind him, Naomi closed the door gently, not to shut him out, but to signal the conversation was paused, not ended. Sterling looked at her home one last time, knowing this wasn't the finale. It was the beginning of something deeper, something he didn't yet understand, something he needed to grow into. Bestie, comment where you're watching from so YouTube knows this story matters. Southeast Atlanta had a rhythm of its own, not the polished beat of downtown or the upscale hum of Buckhead. No, Naomi Reddick grew up in a part of the city where life moved at a steady grind, where people worked double shifts with quiet determination, where neighbors acted like extended family because they had no choice but to lean on one another. Her earliest memories formed inside a 2-bedroom apartment above a small beauty supply store. The hallway always smelled faintly of hair oil and incense. Her mother, Deanna, worked 2 nursing shifts back-to-back at Grady Hospital. Her Aunt Paulette, strict but loving, kept the house together when her mother wasn't there. Baby, the world won't hand you anything, Aunt Paulette would say while braiding Naomi's hair before school. You earn your place. You show up. You fight for what matters. Those words rooted themselves deep inside Naomi long before she learned how unequal the world could be. Growing up, the neighborhood kids played basketball using a bent rim someone attached to a streetlight pole. The ball was soft from overuse, but it didn't matter. They played until the sun dimmed and porch lights flickered on. Across the street, older women sold plates of fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread to help pay utility bills. Men sat on folding chairs outside corner stores discussing the Falcons, local elections, and everything in between. It wasn't glamorous, but it was community, and community was the backbone of Naomi's life. Her mother didn't complain about long shifts or tired feet. She simply said, "We do what we must until we do what we want." Naomi learned early that ease was a luxury, but dignity didn't require wealth. Naomi saw injustice too. Empty grocery stores except for overpriced basics, schools with outdated textbooks, kids who were brilliant but overlooked because they lacked resources. She wasn't oblivious. She felt every gap, every shortage, every closed door. But instead of letting bitterness settle, she let purpose rise. One moment stood out. She was 13 when her school counselor told her she could aim for something practical because scholarships were competitive and students from neighborhoods like yours faced challenges. Naomi didn't argue. She went home, sat at the kitchen table with the hum of the box fan behind her, and wrote on a sheet of loose-leaf paper, "I will build something that helps kids who feel unseen." She didn't know what form it would take. She only knew she wanted to impact lives that reflected her own experiences. Her mother found the paper the next morning. "What's this?" Deanna asked. Naomi shrugged. "Just thoughts." Her mother kissed the top of her head. "Don't lose those thoughts. They're seeds." In high school, Naomi joined every community club she could. She volunteered at food drives, helped tutor younger students, and organized neighborhood cleanups. She didn't do it for college applications. She did it because it felt natural. She was drawn to people, drawn to healing the gaps she had lived through. Money was always tight. Some months, it felt like miracles were stretched thin. But there was never a shortage of love. Evenings were filled with laughter, loud debates, gospel music, and stories, told by elders who believed wisdom was a gift meant to be shared. When Naomi got accepted into Georgia State University, her mother cried. Not soft tears, full, relieved ones. "You're going to change something in this world," she whispered. "I can feel it." Naomi believed her, and she carried her mother's hope into every step she took beyond Southeast Atlanta. Her upbringing didn't give her luxury. It gave her grounding, work ethic, humility, ambition, vision. She didn't come from success. She came from survival, and she would never forget that difference. When Naomi stepped onto Georgia State's campus, she felt like she'd entered a different world. The tall buildings, the sprawling courtyard, the constant movement. It was electric. She majored in community development because it felt like the perfect bridge between her upbringing and her dreams. But even in this new environment, survival was still part of her routine. She worked 2 part-time jobs. Mornings at a campus cafe. Evenings doing administrative tasks at a local nonprofit. During weekends, she tutored high school students from her old neighborhood. She didn't view it as extra work. She viewed it as continuation, staying connected to the community she came from. Her schedule was brutal. She woke up before sunrise, attended classes, rushed to work, studied late into the night, and repeated it all the next day. But Naomi had a quiet determination that powered her like a generator. She wasn't just earning a degree, she was preparing for a mission. There were nights when she cried from exhaustion, sitting at her desk. In her small dorm room, textbooks open and highlighters scattered. But even then she reminded herself, this isn't just about me. It was about the kids she tutored who believed they didn't have options, about the community leaders struggling to get resources, about neighborhoods overlooked by investors and policymakers. During her junior year, Naomi took a course in urban planning that changed everything. The professor required students to research inequities in their childhood neighborhoods. Naomi poured her soul into that project, detailing the food deserts, underfunded schools, and lack of youth programs in Southeast Atlanta. She interviewed residents, collected data, and created a blueprint for a hypothetical youth center. When she presented it to the class, she spoke with conviction that drew everyone in. "We can't fix communities from the outside," she said. "We fix them by investing in people who live there, by giving them the tools to thrive." Her professor stared at her long after the presentation ended. "You're not just doing this for a grade," he said quietly. "No," Naomi replied. "This is personal." He smiled. "Good. The best work always is." That same semester, Naomi met a small group of like-minded students who believed in grassroots change. They became her circle, people who worked, struggled, and dreamed the same way she did. They hosted leadership workshops, volunteered at shelters, and wrote small policy proposals no one outside the campus ever saw. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Naomi felt aligned with her purpose. But college wasn't only about responsibility. Naomi laughed, danced, and lived. She had friendships that felt like family. She learned to navigate the city, to take pride in her roots without apologizing for them. She explored Atlanta's culture, from small jazz bars to community festivals. Still, something was missing. In her senior year, she realized what it was: connection outside her circle. Someone who understood the world she came from but also appreciated her drive to rise. She wasn't looking for romance, but life has a way of introducing people at surprising intersections. Her volunteer advisor invited her to a city-wide service project in partnership with a corporate leadership initiative. Naomi agreed. She always agreed to service work, even when she was tired. As she walked into the event hosted under a large tent near Piedmont Park, she had no idea her life was about to shift. Because among the volunteers, corporate professionals, college students, and community members, was a young man in a crisp button-down shirt, handing out bottled water with a friendly, effortless confidence. His name was Sterling Ward, and neither of them knew that day would be the beginning of everything. The sun was bright that afternoon, casting a warmth across Piedmont Park as volunteers gathered to sort supplies for a citywide youth outreach event. Naomi went straight to the distribution table, ready to coordinate teams like she always did. Sterling stood there, holding a clipboard, reviewing volunteer names. When Naomi approached, he looked up, and for a moment, everything around him slowed. She wasn't dressed up, wasn't wearing makeup, just jeans, a blue t-shirt, and a determined expression. But her presence carried authority, not arrogance. Confidence, not pretense. "You're Naomi, right?" Sterling asked, checking his sheet. "The team lead?" "Yes," she replied. "And you're?" "Sterling." She nodded once. "Good. We need extra hands on the loading side. People are mixing the sanitation kits with the meal bags." He blinked. That sounds bad. It is, she said. Come on. She walked off, expecting him to follow. He did. At the supply station, Naomi took charge naturally. She explained the sorting process clearly, redirected volunteers with ease, and managed minor chaos without losing her calm. Sterling watched her, impressed but quiet. You're really good at this, he said after a while. Naomi shrugged. I've been doing this for years. Still, he said, you command the space. She gave him a sideways glance. Command? I'm just trying to prevent disaster. He laughed, a warm sound that surprised her. Sterling wasn't loud or flashy, but he carried a certain presence too, sharp mind, quick observations, a polite charm that wasn't forced. He wasn't trying to impress her, which Naomi appreciated. As the afternoon went on, they worked side by side, sorting kits, preparing tables, coordinating teams. They found themselves talking in between tasks. He told her he came from a family that valued leadership and ambition. She told him about her mother's nursing shifts and her dreams of creating a youth center someday. You want to build a center? He asked, genuinely intrigued. Yes, she said. A place where kids from neighborhoods like mine feel valued. A place that gives them tools to succeed. That's incredible, he said sincerely. What's stopping you? Funding, she replied. Connections, time, the usual. Sterling studied her closely. You'll do it. I can see that already. She wasn't used to hearing that from people outside her community. His confidence in her, unprompted, threw her off in a good way. Later, when the event ended, Sterling approached her as volunteers packed up. You're impressive, he admitted. I'd like to work with you again. Naomi raised an eyebrow. This isn't a networking event. He laughed softly. I meant it. You're the kind of person people want to follow. She caught the sincerity in his tone. No ego, no agenda. Thank you, she said, giving him a small smile. They shook hands. A simple gesture, but it lingered longer than either expected. Sterling walked away from the event, thinking about her, the energy she carried, the way she made everyone around her better. Naomi walked away thinking about him too, about how someone from such a different world could respect her passion without making her shrink. That day marked the beginning of something neither planned. A connection between two people raised in different worlds, one shaped by community struggle, the other by corporate expectation. A connection that would grow into love, then break under the weight of unspoken needs, and someday, maybe, just maybe, find its way back. If someone had told Naomi that volunteering under a service tent near Piedmont Park would lead to the most significant romance of her life, she would have laughed. But the week after the volunteer event, when her advisor emailed to thank the participants, she noticed that Sterling had replied all with a message offering to organize another volunteer initiative. She hesitated before responding. Then she typed, I'm in. Sterling replied directly to her 10 minutes later. Sterling, glad to hear that. Maybe we could plan it over coffee? Naomi stared at the screen. It wasn't pushy. It wasn't slick. Just confident. She typed back, Naomi, only if we're actually planning and not just meeting for coffee. 5 seconds passed before he answered, Sterling, planning and coffee. That's a promise. And that was how their first date happened, though neither called it a date at the time. They met at a small cafe in Midtown Atlanta, the kind of place with exposed brick and students studying with headphones on. Naomi arrived early, scanning the menu for something affordable, planning to cover her half. Sterling arrived 2 minutes later, slightly out of breath, wearing a clean light blue button-down and dark jeans. His smile came easy. You beat me here, he said. I'm always early, Naomi replied. Habit. Good habit. He stepped up to the counter before she could pull out her wallet. Order anything you want, he said. She lifted a brow. We said we were planning the event. And we are, he replied. But I invited you. Let me cover coffee. She didn't argue, but she watched him pay, wondering silently why he carried himself like someone accustomed to being responsible for others. They sat at a small corner table. The chemistry was unexpected, comfortable, but electric. They actually planned the event. They built a schedule, assigned roles, talked about logistics. But once the planning was done, neither of them stood to leave. So, Naomi, he said, leaning in a little, you said you've been volunteering for years. Why? She sipped her drink. Because people from my community deserved better than what they were given. He nodded. Intrigued. That's powerful. Not powerful, she corrected. Practical. If you see a gap, you fill it. Sterling smiled. You talk like someone who's going to run an entire organization someday. Maybe, she said, shrugging. I want to build something that lifts people the way I was lifted. He nodded slowly, almost admiringly. You're impressive. She gave him a teasing look. You said that last time, because it keeps being true. She tried not to blush, but she did. Their second meeting didn't happen over volunteer work. Sterling texted a week later. Sterling, I know you're busy, but I'd like to take you to dinner. No planning, just dinner. Naomi hesitated. She wasn't used to men from different social backgrounds showing genuine interest without making assumptions, but something about Sterling felt different. Naomi. Okay. Where? Sterling. There's a nice spot in Midtown. I'll pick you up at 7. She typed back. Naomi, you don't need to pick me up. I'll meet you there. It wasn't pride, it was independence. At 7 p.m., she walked into a modern restaurant with soft lighting and a warm ambiance. She expected him to suggest splitting the bill. Instead, he stood up when she arrived, pulled her chair out, and smiled like he'd been waiting all week. You look beautiful, he said, simple and sincere. She wore a simple black dress, not expensive, not flashy, but elegant in her own way. And you look polished, she teased. He laughed. Comes with the job. They ordered meals and talked for hours, about family, ambition, culture, fears. Naomi shared stories of helping her mother through late-night shifts and supporting her neighborhood. Sterling shared stories of growing up with pressure to excel, to lead, to match the achievements of his family. So, your life wasn't easy either, she observed. Different kind of hard, he said. Expectations can be heavy. She nodded. So can survival. Their eyes met. Something settled between them, an understanding. Later, when the bill came, Sterling grabbed it without hesitation. Sterling. It's a date, he said. She wasn't used to men who handled generosity without condescension. He wasn't used to women who didn't expect anything from him. Naomi's world was built on community loyalty, resilience, shared struggles. Sterling's world leaned toward formality, structure, and ambition. And yet, they found compatibility in the spaces between their differences. One night, Naomi took him to a neighborhood cookout in southeast Atlanta. He arrived overdressed, buttoned-down tailored pants, but quickly loosened up when kids ran past him laughing, and an old man slapped him on the back saying, Relax, son. We cookin', not hostin' a business meeting. Naomi laughed for 10 minutes straight. She introduced him to her mother, Deanna, who watched Sterling closely before, finally nodding and saying, You treat her right, and we won't have a problem. Sterling met her firmness with respect. Naomi noticed. He, in turn, took her to dinners with his business peers. She handled herself with poise, but she always found a way to steer conversations toward community issues, impressing powerful people without trying. You're incredible, he told her one night after a formal dinner. She shook her head. I just care, that's all. No, he said. It's more than that. You see people, their worlds were different, yes, but they made space for one another. They asked questions, learned, adjusted. They didn't always understand each other's backgrounds, but they respected them fully. Sterling's affection showed in gestures, not flashy gifts, but thoughtful ones. When Naomi mentioned walking late from her nonprofit job, he arranged for a trusted driver to be available for her at no cost. When she said she needed more textbooks for her community study group, he ordered them without telling her, and she found the box on her doorstep. Sterling, she said, holding the box. I'm not trying to spoil you, he said. I'm trying to support what matters to you. That line stayed with her. Naomi's gestures were different, small, personal, grounding. She left encouraging notes in his work bag, made him soup on nights he returned from stressful meetings, helped him rehearse presentations, listened when he needed clarity. You're the first person who talks to me like I'm a human being and not a brand, he told her once. She kissed his cheek. That's because I'm not in love with your brand. It was one of the most sincere moments of their early romance. Their connection wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't shallow. It grew through real conversations about upbringing, values, goals, about what they feared and what they wanted. One night, after sitting on her mother's porch long after everyone else fell asleep, Naomi whispered, I want to build something lasting, Not just for me, for the kids who grew up like I did. Sterling squeezed her hand. Then I want to help you with that dream. She looked at him, really looked at him. Help, not lead. Help, he said. Only help. She smiled, then rested her head on his shoulder. That night she let herself believe he might truly understand her. The moment Naomi realized she was falling for him happened during a fundraiser event at Georgia State. She watched him talk to students, laugh with volunteers, help an elderly, woman carry supplies, all without performing, all without pretending. He caught her staring. "What?" he said, smiling. "Nothing," she answered. But it wasn't nothing. And Sterling knew he was falling for her when she brought him to a community center she tutored at. He watched her kneel down to help a child with homework, explain a math problem with patience, and encourage him until he got it. Sterling stood there, realizing he had never met a woman with this kind of heart. When she walked over, wiping chalk from her hands, he said softly, "You're the best thing I've ever witnessed." Naomi didn't know what to say, so she just blushed, and he kissed her for the first time under the dim lights of the community center doorway. It was slow, warm, certain, the kind of kiss that didn't rush into anything but promised everything. Naomi always believed weddings were supposed to be joyful, but she didn't expect theirs to feel like a quiet miracle. The ceremony took place in a botanical garden on the edge of Midtown Atlanta, not overly grand, not too small, but exactly the middle ground where both their worlds could meet. Sterling's family attended in tailored suits and subtle designer dresses. Naomi's side arrived in vibrant colors, warm laughter, and heartfelt embraces. And somehow, the two sides blended effortlessly, creating an atmosphere filled with genuine kindness. The day began with Naomi sitting in a preparation room, hands steady, heart full. Her mother, Deanna, sat behind her, adjusting the last bobby pin in her hair. "You ready, baby?" her mother whispered. Naomi nodded. "I've never been more sure about anything." Her mother teared up, just a little. "I'm proud of you." As the music started, Naomi walked down the aisle with her mother on one side and her Aunt Paulette on the other. Sterling stood waiting, his expression one of disbelief, as though he couldn't quite accept that she had chosen him. When she finally reached him, he whispered, "You look stunning." Naomi squeezed his hand. "So do you." They exchanged vows that reflected both their roots. Sterling promised to show up, not just with resources, but with presence. Naomi promised to support him, not his title or his reputation, but the man behind it. The moment the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Sterling leaned in and kissed her with a certainty he'd never expressed before. Their families cheered. Kids from Naomi's neighborhood shouted her name. Sterling's younger sister wiped her eyes. Even Aunt Paulette offered a rare, approving smile. For one beautiful evening, everything felt aligned. After the wedding, Sterling brought Naomi into his world, physically and socially. They moved into his penthouse, a breathtaking space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. It felt surreal at first. Naomi stood in the living room on their first night, staring out at the glowing city lights spreading across the horizon. Sterling came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "This is our life now," he murmured. "Our life," she teased. "Or, your life with me added in." He turned her around gently. "Ours, always ours." She believed him. But it didn't take long for the differences between their worlds to resurface. At first, everything felt exciting. New furniture, weekend brunches in Buckhead, corporate, gatherings where people shook her hand like her presence meant something. She attended events with Sterling where guests spoke about deals, investments, partnerships, and opportunities. They were polite to her, sometimes overly so. But Naomi handled it with grace. Sterling admired how she carried herself. "You can walk into any room," he told her one night as they returned home. "You make people think." Naomi smiled. "Maybe they just aren't used to questions that aren't about profits." He laughed, and that became their pattern. She brought grounding. He brought ambition. And somewhere in the middle, they found balance. For a while, Naomi also brought him into her world. She took him to community forums, tutoring sessions, outreach drives, and block events. Sterling didn't always understand the issues being discussed, but he listened. He met kids who looked up to Naomi like she was a second mother. He shook hands with elders who told him, "Your wife's the real deal, son." Sterling admired her more with each passing day. They created small traditions that made married life feel personal. On Friday nights, they cooked together, her recipes learned from her mother, his from his childhood home in Marietta. Naomi loved that he wasn't afraid to chop onions or wash dishes. He loved that she danced to old-school R&B while stirring pots on the stove. They ate dinner on the balcony, talking about everything: news, dreams, fears, plans. Sterling always loosened his tie, and Naomi always tucked her feet under her as she talked, making the penthouse feel less like a polished museum and more like a home. On Sunday mornings, Naomi made coffee before sunrise, and they sat in, quiet together, sharing a blanket and watching the city wake up below. These moments were slow, intimate, grounding. Naomi treasured them. Sterling did too. For a while, love felt like enough. About 6 months into the marriage, Sterling's company began expanding aggressively. Investors pushed for faster growth. Meetings increased. Deadlines tightened. His travel schedule expanded. Naomi noticed the strain almost immediately. Late nights became common. Phone calls during dinner became frequent. Business trips became longer. One night, Naomi waited up for him until nearly midnight. When he finally walked in, he looked exhausted, tie loose, shirt wrinkled, steps heavy. "You didn't have to wait up," he said gently. "I know," Naomi replied, "but I wanted to." He kissed her forehead, grateful but distracted. "I'm sorry. It's just a busy season." "I understand," she said. And she did, at first. But the busy season never ended. Almost a year into the marriage, Sterling had to fly to Chicago for a week-long negotiation. Naomi stood at the terminal with him before his departure. "You'll call me?" she asked softly. "Of course," Sterling said. "Every night." He kept his promise for the first 3 nights. Then the calls grew shorter. Then work pulled him into late hours. Then exhaustion took over. Naomi didn't complain. She understood responsibility, but she missed him, not just physically, but emotionally. She felt the distance creeping in like a slow draft under a door. When he returned, she hugged him tightly, burying her face in his chest. "I missed you," he held her. "I missed you too. But this work, it's important." "I know," she whispered. But knowing didn't erase the loneliness. Despite the strain, they still found joy. On their first anniversary, Sterling took Naomi to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. "I'm proud of us," he said that night. Naomi smiled. "I'm proud of us too." They danced under string lights. They whispered about the future. They kissed like they still believed nothing could shake them. And for a moment, one small bright moment, they felt invincible. The cracks didn't arrive dramatically. They arrived quietly. One night, Naomi cooked him dinner after he texted saying he'd be home early. She made his favorite pasta, set the table, lit candles. Hours passed. He didn't show. At 10:47 p.m., he walked in, tired and apologetic. "I'm sorry." The meeting ran long. Naomi tried to smile. "It's fine." But it wasn't, because the meal was cold. Her heart felt colder. Another night, she invited him to a youth seminar she helped organize. He vowed to attend. She saved him a seat near the front. Halfway through the event, she looked at the door each time it opened. He never came. When he walked in that night, his first words were, "I forgot." Naomi nodded once, tightly. "Okay." He kissed her cheek. "I'll make it up to you." She let him. But the disappointment didn't fade. By the end of their second year, Naomi began to feel her world shrinking again. This time not because of lack of opportunity, but because she didn't want to burden him. Whenever she brought up concerns, Sterling listened but always had reasonable explanations. "It's temporary. I'm just stressed. I'll slow down soon." She believed him each time, because she loved him. But each promise pushed the slowdown further away. Sterling wasn't unkind. He wasn't dismissive on purpose. He was simply consumed by ambition, something he inherited, something he didn't know how to step away from. Naomi, meanwhile, continued her community involvement, finding purpose in the work even as her marriage grew quieter. She attended rallies, organized tutoring sessions, and poured herself into planning future programs she hoped to build. One night, after returning home from a community meeting, she found Sterling, asleep on the couch, work laptop open beside him, papers scattered. She covered him with a blanket, brushed her fingers lightly across his forehead, and whispered, "We're losing each other, aren't we?" He didn't hear her, and she didn't repeat it. Despite the growing distance, the love remained. They still held hands on morning walks when schedules allowed. They still shared laughs over small things. They still made love with tenderness, not routine. But love alone wasn't enough. Connection needed time. Time needed choice. Choice needed priority. Sterling didn't realize he was drifting. Naomi didn't know how to pull him back without becoming another obligation. They weren't broken, but they were slowly bending. And neither knew how close they were to snapping. The shift in their marriage didn't arrive as a storm. It arrived as a whisper. A series of quiet moments where neither spoke up, neither confronted the tension, neither realized the foundation beneath them was thinning one small piece at a time. It was the way Sterling left before dawn more often, his suit jacket already on, his tie half knotted, coffee in hand, kissing her on the forehead instead of the lips. The way Naomi stopped asking him to attend her community events because the disappointment had become too predictable. The way meals sat untouched in the fridge because he'd get caught up in meetings and work dinners. The way she began eating alone more nights than not. They still loved each other, deeply, undeniably. But love without presence grows lonely. And loneliness, when ignored, turns into something heavier. The first major crack appeared on the 1-year anniversary of Naomi, launching a tutoring initiative for students from her neighborhood. She'd spent weeks preparing a small celebration, nothing grand, just a gathering of students, volunteers, and parents at a local community center. Naomi even saved a seat for Sterling near the front, hoping this time he'd make it. He promised. He said he put it on his calendar. He said he'd leave work early. But the event started. Students spoke. Parents clapped. Kids thanked Naomi for helping them raise their grades. And the seat she reserved stayed empty. Each time the door creaked, she looked up, heart hopeful. Each time, it wasn't him. By the time the final student finished speaking, she wasn't angry. She was numb. When the event ended, a volunteer hugged her and said, "Your husband must be so proud of you." Naomi smiled politely. "I hope so." But inside, something fragile bent further. Sterling walked through the door at home at 10 p.m., exhausted, tie loosened. Eyes apologetic the second he saw her sitting at the kitchen table. "Naomi," he said quietly, setting his briefcase down. "You didn't come," she replied softly, not as accusation but disappointment. He rubbed the back of his neck. "The meeting ran longer than expected. I should have called, I know." She nodded. "I saved you a seat." He sighed deeply, guilt flashing across his face. "I'm sorry, truly. I'll make it up to you." She didn't reply. He kissed her cheek. "Next time, I promise." Those words would become a theme, a slow erosion disguised as reassurance. One evening, months later, Naomi prepared a quiet dinner, nothing elaborate, just baked chicken, vegetables, and cornbread. She set the table for two, hoping they could reconnect, talk, breathe together the way they used to. Sterling texted 20 minutes before he was supposed to arrive. "Running late, new deadline, don't wait up." She stared at the message for a long time, her eyes burning. She typed back, "Okay." She ate alone again, silence filling every corner of the penthouse. When Sterling got home past midnight, he found her asleep on the couch with her laptop open beside her. Her glasses rested on the cushion. Her notes for the youth center she dreamed of one day building were spread out across the coffee table. He knelt beside her, brushing a finger across her cheek. She stirred slightly but didn't fully wake. Instead of picking her up and carrying her to bed, he kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm trying. I really am." But effort unspoken is invisible, and Naomi felt none of it. People often assume marriages fall apart after dramatic arguments or loud confrontations, but Naomi and Sterling didn't fight. They didn't scream. They didn't hurl insults. Their marriage didn't fall apart through noise. It fell apart through silence. Naomi stopped asking questions like, "Will you be home for dinner? Can you come to this event? Do you have time this weekend?" Because each question felt like setting herself up for disappointment, and Sterling, buried under deadlines, didn't notice the gradual quieting of her needs. He believed she understood his world. She believed he didn't see hers. They lived in the same space but different realities. One night, Naomi arrived home from a difficult meeting with community leaders who told her that youth support funding was unlikely this year. She felt defeated, worn out, overwhelmed. She needed comfort, needed a partner, needed someone who would sit with her while she cried and said, "It's going to be okay. You're doing important work." She waited for Sterling. She waited for his key turning in the lock. She waited for a text. Nothing. By the time he walked through the door at nearly 1 a.m., Naomi had dried her tears. washed her face and curled up on the couch in sweatpants, pretending to be fine. He walked in smiling wearily. "You're still up?" "I couldn't sleep." He kissed her quickly and walked to the kitchen. "Today was insane. We closed a major deal. I'm exhausted." He talked about his day for 10 minutes straight without noticing her red eyes or quiet voice. Naomi listened, smiled, nodded, and said nothing. Because somewhere along the way, she learned her feelings didn't fit into his world. During their second year, Naomi's desire to build something meaningful grew stronger. She applied for multiple grants, built small community programs, and tried to pitch her ideas for a youth center. Sterling supported her verbally. "That's amazing, you should do it, you're meant for this." But emotionally, he was absent. She needed a partner who asked follow-up questions. Who asked, "How did the meeting go?" Who asked, "What can I help with?" Who asked, "What's the next step?" Instead, he gave her generic praise, the kind you give out of routine rather than interest. And the more she grew, the more he stayed rooted in the same cycle. Work, stress, success, pressure. They weren't outgrowing each other, they were growing in separate directions. Naomi didn't fault him. He didn't fault her. They simply didn't talk about it, and unspoken truths became barriers. Their second wedding anniversary arrived quietly. Naomi hoped Sterling would remember. She didn't need a lavish gift, just acknowledgement, just a sign that their marriage still mattered to him. She cooked dinner again, shrimp, asparagus, rice, set candles, wore a soft dress, pulled her hair back the way he once said he loved. She waited, and waited. At 8:42 p.m., he texted, "Big day tomorrow. Working late. Love you." She stared at the message until her vision blurred. When he arrived home after midnight, exhausted, he found her sitting in the dark dining room, untouched food on the table, candles melted down. "Naomi," he whispered, voice cracking. "I forgot." She breathed in deeply, so deeply he saw her chest tremble. "Yes," she said quietly. "You did. I'm sorry. Please, I'm so sorry." Naomi nodded. "I know." She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't guilt-trip him. That hurt him more than any anger could have. "You're everything to me," he said softly, approaching her. She looked up at him with eyes that were kind, but tired. "I love you," she said. "But love isn't the same as presence." His throat tightened. "I'll do better." She nodded again, but her expression said something else. "I've heard that before." After the anniversary incident, something inside Naomi quietly fractured. Not her love for him, but her belief that their marriage was a partnership. She poured more of herself into community work. He poured more into corporate success. They became polite, warm, distant, predictable. In public, they looked perfect. In private, they lived parallel lives. Naomi's dreams expanded. Sterling's responsibilities multiplied. 2 separate worlds, 2 separate journeys. One shared house. Neither wanted to fail. Neither wanted to hurt the other, but neither knew how to bridge the growing quiet. About 2 years and 3 months into their marriage, Naomi tried one last time. It was late. Sterling was home early for once. They sat on the couch, both tired, but close enough for honesty. "Sterling," she said, voice soft but steady. "Are we okay?" He looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" "We're drifting," she whispered. "I feel like I'm losing you." He took her hand. "You're not losing me. Work is just a lot." She nodded. "And my life is a lot too." He kissed her knuckles. "I love you. I love you too," she said. "But love doesn't fix distance." He frowned. "What do you want me to do?" "Show up," she answered. It was the same answer she'd been giving since the first crack.